On the banks of a great river that has long since turned into a vast marsh lay a valley known as Karang Lupa. There was no village, no fields, no birds nesting among the trees. All that remained was a stretch of black stones, always damp with moisture every morning, even though no rain had fallen. The elders who lived along the Wening River believed that the valley was not cursed because of some terrible sin. Instead, it was cursed because humanity had once done something far more dangerous. They had agreed to forget someone. Legend tells that hundreds of years ago, Karang Lupa was the most prosperous village along the Wening River. Its rice fields stayed lush throughout every season. Fishing boats always returned with abundant catches. The laughter of children echoed through the village streets until nightfall. The villagers believed that as long as they continued to remember one another's names, the river would never cease to flow, carrying life to everyone. In that village lived an elderly woman, alone at the very edge of the settlement, near the riverbank. She was neither a healer nor a person of great importance. She was simply an old woman who spent her days in quiet solitude. Every dawn, even before the first rooster crowed, she would walk down to the river. A thin veil of mist still hovered over the water as she carried 2 clay jars. One jar was for herself. The other she always filled to the brim and placed beside the roadside, so that anyone passing by would never have to ask for a drink of water. Beside the jar rested a small cup, carefully folded from a banana leaf. There was never a written message. There was never a name. Yet everyone knew that the jar belonged to the old woman by the river. As the morning sun climbed higher, she would make her way along the rice field embankments, not to harvest the crops, but to gather every grain of rice that had fallen so that nothing would be wasted. The sparrows always followed quietly in her footsteps. She simply smiled gently. "Don't fight. You're all just looking for something to eat." Then she scattered the grains of rice across the ground. Before long, her yard was filled with sparrows, arriving one after another. The village children often said that the old woman's home was livelier than anyone else's. As the afternoon faded, they would gather on the veranda of her little house to play. "Grandma, why does this leaf smell so wonderful?" The old woman chuckled softly. "It's not the leaf that smells sweet. Then what is it?" "It's a leaf that is happy to be touched by the rain." The children burst into laughter. They never truly understood what she meant. Yet they always loved hearing her answer. One day, the village chief said to the council of elders, "When Grandma is gone, who will keep the children? Company while their parents are working in the rice fields?" One of the elders nodded slowly. "That's true. She has become like the roots that keep this village alive. No one knew exactly when it all began. The seasons changed as they always had. Yet the rain never truly came. At first, the villagers believed it was nothing more than a dry season that had lasted a little longer than usual. No one felt there was any reason to worry. But days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The sky remained empty. The Wening River slowly receded, revealing ancient stones that had lain hidden beneath its waters for decades. The rice fields cracked open like aging skin. Banana leaves curled inward before they even had the chance to turn yellow. The birds abandoned the trees. Even the chorus of crickets that usually filled the night fell silent. When darkness came, the sky looked unnaturally clear. No clouds, no dew. No scent of earth rising before the rain. It was as though nature itself had stopped breathing. A quiet unease slowly spread throughout the entire village. The elders began to whisper among themselves. It has been a very long time since nature stopped breathing like this. The village's rice stores continued to dwindle. One by one, the granaries that had once been full stood nearly empty. One evening, the entire village gathered in the meeting hall. A young man rose to his feet and called out, "We can't just sit here and wait. We have to find the cause of all this." Another voice quickly answered, "There must be something that has made the river close itself to us." Voices overlapped as one after another offered their thoughts. Everyone searched for an answer, yet no one truly had one. Then, from the corner of the room, a man spoke in a quiet voice. "Have any of you noticed, ever since that old woman began living alone, the rains have come later and later?" The village hall fell into sudden silence. Several people exchanged uneasy glances. "That's only a coincidence." Another voice replied softly, "Or perhaps it isn't." The words were simple, but fear always grows faster than the truth. That very night, the village elders gathered in secret. Without the other villagers, oil lamps flickered gently in the dry wind. Their faces were worn with exhaustion and worry. One of the elders broke the silence. "We have no proof." The oldest elder stared into the flame of an oil lamp for a long moment before finally speaking. "Fear has never needed proof." The room fell silent once again. "Then, what should we do?" The old elder drew a long, heavy breath. "We will not drive her away." "Then what?" "We will erase her place from our memory." No one spoke. Several faces turned pale at once. "That is too cruel." The oldest elder lowered his head. "Then Would it be better to let the entire village starve to death? No one could answer. That night, a decision that should never have been made began to take shape. And without anyone realizing it, the fate of Karang Lupa was changed forever. During the first few days after the villagers decided to distance themselves from the old woman who lived at the edge of the village, nature showed no sign of change. The sun still rose from behind the distant hills. The morning mist still lifted gently from the surface of the Wening River. Dew still clung to the tips of the wild grass. The sparrows still arrived to welcome the dawn. It was as though the world had not yet realized that within the human heart, a decision had taken root, one that would eventually change everything. Yet the first thing to change was not nature. It was the people. Those who had once always stopped to greet her, now lowered their heads and walked past in silence. No smiles lingered anymore. No simple greetings remained. Even their footsteps grew quicker whenever they passed the old woman's house. The children who used to run joyfully into her yard could now only watch from a distance. They still wanted to visit. They still wanted to hear her stories. They still wanted to feed the birds that always gathered there. But each time they took a step toward her home, their parents' voices would immediately call them back. Don't go over there. Why, Mother? That's enough. Don't ask. The children glanced one last time toward the little bamboo house at the end of the path. Then they walked away, leaving behind a yard that felt quieter than ever before. The old woman slowly began to notice the change. Once, someone would greet her every morning. Once, children would come asking for stories. Now, her yard stood empty. The birds still came, but the people were beginning to stay away. One afternoon, she met the village chief along the road. She smiled gently. Have the rice fields begun to recover? The village chief stopped. His lips parted as though he wanted to answer, but in the end, he only gave a slow nod. Then he walked away, without saying a single word. The next morning, no one greeted the old woman. No one stopped to take water from the clay jar in front of her house. It remained full until the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. For the first time in decades, not a single set of footprints appeared outside her home. The old woman sat quietly on her veranda for a long time. She looked down the village road she had known all her life. Softly she whispered to herself, I must have done something wrong. But she did not know what that mistake was. When everyone had been forbidden to speak the old woman's name, a small child quietly came to her carrying a piece of boiled cassava. The child said, Grandma, Mother told me I'm not allowed to come here. The old woman smiled. Then why did you come? The child lowered his head. Because I was afraid you'd have to eat alone. The old woman accepted the cassava with both hands. For a long while she gazed at the child's face. Then she spoke softly. If one day you begin to forget my face, don't force yourself to remember. Just remember that once there was someone who loved you very much. A few days later, the following morning, she still filled the water jar. She still swept the village path. She still scattered rice for the birds. She still waited for the children to come. No one came. She watched the village road grow quieter with each passing day. She saw the water jar that no traveler touched anymore. She saw the children who now dared only to look from a distance. Yet she asked no one why. Every morning she still walked down to the river to fetch fresh water. She still swept the narrow path in front of her little house. She still scattered grains of rice for the sparrows. She still placed a jar of clear water beneath the woro tree, as though she still believed that one day someone would stop there again. The days passed slowly. Silence became the companion that stayed with her most often. And on the seventh day, for the very first time, nature began to feel slightly different. Not a change that could be seen with the eyes, but something that could only be sensed by a heart willing to truly pay attention. The wind still drifted through the village, yet its breath felt strangely empty. It no longer carried the fragrance of the forest flowers that once filled the morning air. It simply passed by without a sound, without a scent, as though it were carrying a sorrow too deep to be spoken. The mist that usually appeared just before dawn now lingered a little longer. It no longer vanished as soon as the sun rose. Instead, it hung low among the trees, blanketing the village paths, making the houses in the distance appear like fading shadows, slowly dissolving into silence. A few people noticed the change. but they dismissed it as nothing more than another shift in the seasons. The sparrows still came to the old woman's yard. They perched quietly on the bamboo fence, waiting, as though expecting someone to call them. But no voice came. No children's laughter. No weathered hands scattering grains of rice. After a while, the sparrows took flight again. They circled once above the little house, then disappeared into the forest. For the first time, the silence in that yard seemed louder than the wind itself. Along the banks of the Wening River, the morning dew still appeared with every dawn, but it no longer chose the tips of the leaves. Instead, the crystal clear droplets gathered more often upon the great stones that had always remained dry. No one understood why. No one believed it mattered. For people are often far more occupied with finding answers to their fears than with listening to the quiet whispers of nature. No one realized that from the day they stopped greeting a heart so full of kindness, the village had begun to lose something invisible. Not the rain, not its fertility, not even the sunlight, but its rhythm. The rhythm that had always told the wind when to blow, the mist when to return home, and the river where to carry every memory. And when that rhythm began to fracture, nature did not cry out. It simply grew a little quieter. On the seventh day after the entire village had succeeded Dot in forgetting the old woman, the drought finally came to an end. The rain returned. The river swelled with life once more. Everyone rejoiced. They believed they had won. But they never realized that something else had changed. With each passing year, one family would begin to forget the way back to their own home. A father no longer recognized his child. A mother forgot the sound of her baby's voice. A child called a stranger mother. Little by little, the memories of the village began to leak away. At last, the elders sought out a water wanderer. He stood silently in the middle of the village for a long time. Then he spoke in a quiet voice. You did not erase a single person. You taught the world that a human life could be erased from memory. And now, memory itself is repeating what you have done. The villagers were overcome with fear. They tried to remember the old woman, but not a single one of them could. Her name had truly sunk beyond their reach. In the world of Wening Tirta, what is forgotten together passes into the layer of silence and almost never returns. One by one, the houses stood empty. Not because their inhabitants had died, but because they had forgotten one another. Parents forgot they had children. Husbands forgot they had ever been married. Friends forgot they had ever met. The village that had once been the liveliest of all slowly became a place of profound silence. There were no arguments. There were no tears. For even the reasons to weep had been forgotten. In time, the entire village was abandoned. The houses collapsed. The rice fields turned into marshland, and black stones emerged from the earth. Legend says those stones are where memories that never found their way back came to rest. Every dawn, droplets of dew gather upon them. Not water, but the remnants of memories that failed to find their rightful owners. To this day, the boatmen avoid Karang Lupa Valley. They believe that if someone walks there alone at sunrise, they may hear a voice calling their name, not to bring them harm, but to make sure that there is still one person in this world willing to remember. For the elders of Wening Tirta have always ended this tale with the same words. The most terrible curse is not when the land becomes barren. It is when people learn to erase other people from memory. And legend says that at every dawn, when the mist settles thickest over Karang Lupa Valley, a single clay water jar can still be seen standing beside the old path. No one knows where it comes from. The water within is always clear. It never runs dry, nor does it ever gather moss, though no human hand has cared for it in generations. Some travelers claim they have drunk from that jar. When they turned to offer their thanks, they saw the figure of an elderly woman standing in the distance. Her body was wrapped in mist. Her face was almost impossible to see, yet her smile felt unmistakably warm. As they stepped closer, her figure slowly faded into the morning dew. All that remained was the whisper of the wind and the circling song of sparrows high above. The elders of Wening Tirta believe the old woman never cursed her village. She simply continued to wait, waiting for the day when someone would come not in search of treasure, nor to break a curse, but to remember the one who had once been forgotten. For in the world of Wening Tirta, as long as there remains even one heart willing to remember with sincerity, no memory is ever truly lost. And perhaps, on a dawn that has yet to arrive, Karang Lupa Valley will have its name once again,